I'm gonna get you damn Nigerians.
Radio Free Innsmouth, episode 321. I have a feeling that a lot of people have been waiting for this episode, because it's about a band that's kind of important to the whole Radio Free Innsmouth story, even though I haven't talked about them specifically all that much. Drum roll, please. The band we will be talking about this week. Okay, you can stop with the drumming now. That's fine. All right.
Hey, Billy. Break it up, son.
These death metal drummers, I swear to God. Crucifier. Okay, it's about Crucifier. Now, I say this band's pretty important to this channel because a lot of the big breakout videos on this channel have been about either Argus Lent or Grand Belial's Key, and Crucifier is connected to both of them. Those two bands, politics aside, whatever, are still pretty different from almost every other band in the metal scene. Like, Grand Belial's Key is nominally black metal, Argus Lent is nominally death metal, and yet they both have more in common with each other than either band does with any conventional black metal band in the case of GBK, or death metal band in the case of Argus Lent. I think we can all agree on that. That's why people like them. Crucifier is sort of an interesting bridge between whatever that new incipient genre of GBK Ghostlent core is and more normal, more extreme sorts of death metal and black metal. The main guy behind Crucifier, one Kaz Grant, is also notable for being the drummer on the first two Grand Belial's Key albums, mostly done as a favor to his friend Jalal Necrosodomy. And in fact, both of those guys are currently in a band called Hearse that is part of the Crucifier story we'll get to a little bit later.
제가 V앱을 너무 안 한다고.
That's a good question. Where to start with Crucifier? I mean, they've been around longer even than Grand Belial's Key and Argus Lent, and they've released a pretty decent smattering of material between 1990 and today. Luckily, Crucifier kind of answered that for us themselves with their most recently available release, the Say Your Prayers EP from 2 years ago, which is a combination of demo era songs redone with a more professional production job, a couple of newer songs, and a Carnivore cover. So it functions as a pretty good brief summary of Crucifier's career. And what a career it has been, because this is foundational US black metal. You already know GBK, Profanatica, Black Funeral, Absu. You gotta know Crucifier. And even on this simplest song on the EP, you can still hear a lot of weird, unique stuff. Like that little guitar flourish right there, vintage Crucifier, the kind of thing you can really only hear from them. Other stuff you can only really hear from Crucifier has a lot to do with the drumming. As you're hearing right now, it's not straightforward black metal, death metal drumming at all. This guy's like the Bill Ward of unholy black metal. And here we're getting into some stuff that sounds a little bit more like Grand Belial's Key. In fact, I would characterize the relationship between the two bands as being similar to one between early Lucifugum and early Nocturnal Mortem, where early Nocturnal Mortem was very catchy, very poppy, and memorable, and like pretty unique sounding. Lucifugum was doing similar stuff, but it was a lot more rigid and dogmatic and had more in common with more extreme forms of black metal than Nocturnal Mortem did. But speaking of the early days, I mentioned that Crucifier had all this material going way back to 1990. Obviously, if you're a Crucifier fan, you're going to want to know the official albums, the full lengths, the EPs, but their demos are arguably just as important. Definitely not, to borrow a turn of phrase from one Mr. Howard Phillips Lovecraft, inconsequential juvenilia. As a matter of fact, the very first 1990-1991 demo, charmingly entitled Humans Are Such Easy Prey, bit of a Lovecraft reference, since that's a reference to the movie From Beyond, is one of my favorite Crucifier releases.
Humans are such easy prey.
And look at that. This riff right here, this is 1990, and it sounds exactly like what we would call second wave black metal today. Definitely ahead of its time. Also sounds like Grand Belial's Key quite a bit, and yet this is 2 years before those guys even put out a demo. Here's another Crucifier trademark, a heavy emphasis on tempo variations, taking that second wave fast black metal riff and making it kind of doom metal. The doom would also become a major factor for Crucifier going forward, as well as for Kaz Grant's other band Hearse. But enough about that doom, because the death metal component to Crucifier's music is where they really split off from Grand Belial's Key, playing fast chaotic stuff very much in a Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey death metal style. And yet, As that section demonstrates, they still don't quite sound like a knockoff of any other band. They're very much doing their own thing, with a real emphasis on each change in the music feeling like the band is making a big narrative statement.
We are here to make, a statement. Fuck you! You know what I mean?
My personal favorite material from the pre-album era of Crucifier has to be the Humans Are Such Easy Prey demo, but you can make a case for any particular release from this period being the best. The Crown of Thorns demo, By Disgrace of God demo, Unparalleled Majesty EP, hell, even the Trafficking with the Devil split with Nunslaughter. It's all fucking fantastic. And it's all actually pretty easily available now, too, with very good production quality on the Coffins Through Time of Mourning in Nazareth compilation, which was recently repressed by Death Rune Records after its initial issue on Iron Bonehead. If you're into the Argus Slant GBK corner of black metal and death metal and you don't own that, I don't really know what you're doing with your life.
Run back to your investors and tell them you shat the bed, little bro.
But for me, Crucifier starts getting really good, classic status good, when they finally get around to putting out their first full-length album. That being 2003's Stronger Than Passing Time. There's a saying that goes, and I don't even remember who I first heard it from, you have your whole life to create your first album. And Crucifier certainly took advantage of that by presenting to us some very well worked through compositions. A lot of them started out as songs on the demos that were then added to and subtracted from over the years. The arrangements were ironed out. The new songs as well, seems like a lot of thought was put into how they were pieced together. And as varied and complex as demo era Crucifier was, album era Crucifier is really just fucking crazy, combining a whole lot of different styles, like the sort of triumphant shit you might hear from Argus Lent, the mocking, layered melodies you might hear from a band like Grand Belial's Key, the ultra primitive, almost ambient sort of flowing melody you might get from a band like Profanatica, and the chaotic churning mess you might expect from an Eastern Seaboard death metal band like Immolation. All of that kind of stuff is mixed together along with a reverence for a lot of old school kind of 80s thrash metal stuff and peculiar idiosyncrasies endemic to Crucifier. And it comes out sounding fucking great. Like this riff right here, this could have come right off of an Argus Lent album, but it blends incredibly nicely into this section right here, showing off their penchant for introducing every new change in the music as sort of a profound musical statement. So now we're into more of a Grand Belial's Key sounding layered mocking melody. It then blends into a much more primitive sort of Profanatica-esque, or maybe even going back to Brazilian chaotic blackened thrash metal kind of thing. And that sort of material ties beautifully into that hyper chaotic, churning, nasty New York style bit. But at the same time, it all definitely feels like the same band playing all of it, and the same guy writing all the riffs. That opening track on the Stronger Than Passing Time album, titled Sodomy of Angels, does a great job of showing off all of the different little bits of novelty that Crucifier has in their bag of tricks. But the further you get into the album, the more you start hearing stuff that's just uniquely Crucifier. Nobody else quite sounds like it. And that primarily comes through in how they write their melodies, which out of all other bands is probably most similar to Grand Belial's Key. But even then, it's really a, as I mentioned earlier, sort of Lucifugium versus Nocturnal Mortem thing where, yeah, they sound more like each other than they sound like any other band, but both styles are still pretty distinct. You got this song in there called Near the Lilith, which I gotta think was them predicting the 2023 Himari song Lilith, because I don't know who the fuck wouldn't want to kneel to that. Anyways, this riff right here is fucking nuts. It doesn't sound that crazy when it comes in, but the more you pay attention to it, and the more they start to really lean into it, you see how it combines all of these different sounds into like one very unique Crucifier sort of thing. Especially when they lean more into their doom metal side. You get a feel for all the different parts of the riffs, because the riff starts out with that like hammer-on pull-off thing, and then it finishes up with that really long, drawn-out sort of melody, almost like drawing a bow across strings more than conventional guitar picking, and putting all these kind of weird bends into everything. A little bit of vibrato there, and just as you're vibing, it stops. before jumping back into the more frenzied material that started the song out. The really bonkers midsection is an important part of Crucifier's overall songwriting process, particularly on this album. And it becomes even more noticeable on my personal favorite song, A Morning in Nazareth, which kind of like Sodomy of Angels started out as a demo, and then they just like kept reworking it and adding to it and ironing out all the kinks over the years before making the full-length album version.
I have a Type 4 civilization at the crib.
This one goes even harder on the doom metal shit. This one starts out a little bit more percussive in its riffing, while still maintaining that weird Crucifier sense of melody. And that melody kind of goes along its merry way for quite a while before fully collapsing in on itself into a massive doom metal section, which acts as a springboard for some truly demented soloing while still keeping the essential melodic character of the intro riff intact. And it gets even fucking doomier, dude. And during these ultra doom metal kind of sections, Kaz Grant can really show off his really unique, non-traditional for black metal or death metal style of drumming, with all of his weird different creative beats, before then jumping back into a really clever counterpoint riff to the melody that started the song out. You know, for a band as intentionally disgusting and blasphemous as Crucifier is, they have some very subtle and intelligent songwriting that might be lost on a lot of people who would otherwise enjoy it due to the very transgressive nature of this music. But hey, baby, that's fucking death metal. That's black metal, bro.
If people don't recognize it, fuck them.
It's also worth noting that from the 90s into the present day, Kaz Grant, the main guy behind Crucifier, has had a whole bunch of side projects, collaborations with other musicians, that kind of thing. That's actually a big part of why I see Crucifier sort of being a bridge between the weird and isolated world of Grand Beslagregant core and the more normative death metal and black metal underground scenes. Like for a while, he had a band called Masada that actually featured the drummer on the first Immolation album. But my favorite out of all of these, and the one that Kaz Grant himself seems to have been the most attached to, is Hearse, a band describing themselves as funeral metal.
어플로 주문을 하던가?
No, not funeral doom metal, which is an established genre in and of itself at this point, although Hearse does get rather doomy. He says it's funeral metal, and normally I see somebody coming up with a new genre for stuff they're doing, I'm like, I don't know, buddy. With Hearse, it actually does make sense because there's not a lot out there that sounds exactly like what Hearse does, particularly on their 1999 demo, So Shines a Good Deed in a Weary World. This demo's got a whole lot of these ultra minimalist sort of descending 2 or 3 chord black metal riffs, played with a very ambient music sort of affectation, with Kaz Grant's as always rather busy percussion dancing around everything. That doesn't really sound like anything else that was coming out of the US at the time, and actually, perhaps more through happenstance than anything else, quite resembles a harsher version of Thousand Swords era Gravelands, just with the aesthetics tuned more towards doom death than folky black metal. These lengthy droning sections are interspersed with more complex and riff-heavy sections that lean even harder into that sort of doom death atmosphere, whether it be a very droning sort of doom death, like what you're hearing right here. Ultra simple drumming with very heavy snare and cymbal hits and low-pitched echoing kind of riffs, or when it moves more towards a mid-paced sort of doom death sound, like right here where it almost sounds like the guys from Crucifier providing their take on something like Trouble, again with a very strong drum-oriented kind of groove to everything. If you're into Crucifier, don't sleep on Hearse. You'll like it a lot, because the Hearse demos slot in very nicely between all of those Crucifier demos. And it's kind of a shame that Hearse has always been so overlooked, although part of that has to do with during, the Halcyon periods of death metal's reign, they were only putting out demos. We'll get back more to Hearse farther into the episode, but getting back to Crucifier now, these guys take quite a while to put out a second full-length album. And eventually, it does drop in 2018, and it's got, pretty standard sort of Mark Riddick, monochromatic, blasphemous sort of cover with goats and skulls on it. When I initially saw this album back in the day, I didn't really pay attention to it too much. I just thought, I was like, whatever. Not really through any fault of the music itself or even through fault of the album cover art. I mean, I like Mark Riddick's art a lot. I like most of what I've heard coming from the Riddick brothers artistically, although I'm pretty sure I'm the only person that prefers the black metal project Yamato to their stuff with grave wax. I'm not like the other girls.
Shut up!
It's just that in 2018, I think a lot of the scene had collectively overdosed on, retro death whatever albums with monochromatic Mark Riddick style covers with skulls and goats on them. So I kind of let this album sit longer than I should have and didn't really give it a serious listen until maybe 2 or 3 years ago. And when I did, I was like, I'd been missing out like a big dummy because this album actually fucking slaps. So don't make the same mistake I did. Second Crucifier album, Thy Sulfur Thrown on High. Absolute fucking banger. It's got some really heavy groove-inflected mid-paced death metal going on that harkens back quite a bit to the best of what I heard on the Hearse demos, which is really interesting to see. But then when that death metal speeds up, it brings in that churning atmospheric New York death metal Immolation sort of feel. In fact, I fucking love pretty much every Immolation album, but I gotta say, as far as newer music goes, I feel like Crucifier do Immolation better than newer Immolation does. Like, check out this absolute beast of a churning riff. That shit'll fucking put hair on your balls. So the death metal component of Crucifier's sound, absolutely intact and possibly better than ever with this release. But where shit gets really fucking good is with the black metal component of the sound, which very much exists within that Crucifier mold of having a uniquely sinister sense of atmospheric melody, as well as an apocalyptic atmosphere. This transition bit's really cool right here, doing this total Hellhammer Celtic Frost style chromatic buildup into a full stop. Before then coming back in with some very primitive and sinister chromatic black metal riffs that have this sort of weird off-kilter sense to them, unique to Crucifier again, before then jumping back into a more melodic style, building the tension that will be released with an absolute monster of a doomy section. Maybe my favorite moment in the discography. I mean, come on, dude. That is some of the best shit ever. But would you believe the section that follows it is perhaps even greater in stature? I mean, that had to be one of the greatest American black metal riffs I've ever heard. 100% the level of anything from Burzum or Graveland. And this fucking solo here is so sick. This whole track is so sick. They actually have 2 different versions on the album. One is the opener, one is the closer. The main difference between the two being that one has Kaz Grant playing the guitar solo and one has Dan Keaton playing the guitar solo. I prefer the Kaz Grant one a little bit, but they're both great. This whole album's fucking amazing, and you should absolutely go and get it, even though it's going to take a while to ship because the most easily available version of it nowadays is on Death Rune Records, and I swear to God, it's always been like this. Even back when I was a teenager ordering crematory reissues from Necroharmonic, the postal service in Spain is slow as fuck, dude.
Come back here, you rat.
And speaking of slow as fuck, we finally kind of reached the end of the Crucifier Odyssey. But everybody's favorite purveyors of funeral metal, that being Hearse, have also returned. This time with the Grand Belial's key guy being an official band member. Out of nowhere, 2022, the very first Hearse full-length album drops, and it's an absolute banger. A lot of the songs on this album sort of mash together that kind of ambient black metal approach with the doom death approach, to where you just have this slow-moving wall of sound where the distinguishing factors between each riff become irrelevant, and you just have this constant flowing stream with almost omnipresent lead guitar. The transitions between each melody are so smooth, and Kaz Grant's vocals this time around sound almost exactly like Nick Holmes on early Paradise Lost, which absolutely fits the vibe of this material. But the star for me here has to be that guitar work, which, like, if you're into the doomy parts of Crucifier, some of the best parts of Crucifier, you're gonna love this, because it absolutely builds on that in the biggest way. But man, those lead guitars, dude.
Wow, man, freaked out!
If you've seen episode 314 of Radio Free Innsmouth, you know I love the new Argus Slant and the new Grand Belial's Key. This new Hearse album, honestly, I might like it a little bit more than those two albums. And between that new Hearse album and the Say Your Prayers EP that I opened this Crucifier episode with, I believe I am justified in being very excited for the new Crucifier album that's going to drop roughly within 5 days of me recording this episode. So if any of that shit I played for you sounded interesting, be sure to check out the new Crucifier album, Led Astray, on April 12th. I'll leave you with that. Thank you for listening or watching or whatever you did, and I will fucking see you next time.
First I taught you how to make money, and now I'm gonna kill you, you Nigerians.
Shit!